and thank you for this fourth in my series of free facilitation webinars, this one titled What Does It Take for People to Align Behind Change? Thank you, Sonny and Michael, for being with me to facilitate and present today. Please all do use the general chat pod on your right to introduce yourselves. Tell us where you are, something about who you are, and use the poll pods in the center of the screen to indicate where you're located and something about your background. I'll invite some of you to introduce yourselves by voice as well in just a moment, but let me first say just a little bit about the session. So the aim of the series of webinars is to give you all an opportunity to learn something about facilitation and ICA's technology of participation in particular through free 1-hour interactive online sessions combining an experience of virtual facilitation as well as some content of interest. You will receive the slides that we share and a recording of the session and a transcript of the chat pods after the session, as well as any contact details you choose to share. That'll all be sent to everybody who's registered for the session. 54 people registered, and it looks like there's 13 of us here now. So thank you to you for joining. This particular session is titled, What Does It Take for People to Align Behind Change? That was the topic of a Twitter chat hosted by myself and Michael last year, which engaged 69 facilitation, communications, and change management professionals. So in this session, Michael's going to share something of our experience of that with you and something of the outputs, some top tips and tools, and how he has applied some of those in his own work with the International Association of Business Communicators. It is International Facilitation Week this week, so happy FAC Week, everybody. Please feel free to use the FAC Week hashtag that you can see the logo there, middle left, or also the top facilitation hashtag if you wish. Michael, first of all, would you like to introduce yourself, just say a few words, and then I'll invite Sonny to do the same.
Sure. So Michael Ambion, I'm really pleased to be here, and we're looking forward to this session, basically following up from last year where we identified 6 top tips. Today we'll do a little bit of a case study. Brief background, at the moment I'm in Basel. I can see France on one side, I can see Germany on the other, and I'm actually on Swiss territory. And I think that speaks to the need for strong collaboration between people, and I think that's why facilitation is more important than ever, and it's something I'm passionate about. That said, today I'll talk a little bit more about the role of communication and what communicators can do in the broader setup when you're trying to basically align people behind change.
Thank you, Michael. Your microphone is a little low, I think. If you could go to the microphone button and adjust your microphone volume up a little bit while Sonny's introducing herself. Thank you. Sonny, would you like to just say a few words about yourself?
Sure, had to find my mic button. I'm located in the U.S., just beneath the Rocky Mountains in Denver, Colorado. I've been facilitating a very long time, and been with the IAF since we made it up in the beginning, and am a top technology of participation, or ICA, facilitator, and do training on those methodologies. And have just recently moved into the virtual world along with Martin and others to at my age, the schlepping of tables one must do in face-to-face facilitation is no longer the fun that it once was. So I'm enjoying being in a virtual setting much more often. And I'll turn it back to Martin.
Thank you very much, Sonny. And thank you to all of you for participating in the polls in the middle. I'm going to just end those now and we'll see the results. Most of you are in Europe. We've got one in Latin America, Caribbean. I think that's Ulla in Jamaica, and one in North America. I guess that's Sonny in Denver. And most of you describe yourselves as facilitation professionals or other, but 1 or 2 comms and change management. If you'd like to introduce yourself by voice, please do so. We'd love to hear some other voices. Please raise your hand and let's hear from some of you directly. As you do that, I'm just going to have a look through the chat pod and see who's here and what you've said. So Ulla in Jamaica, we saw you a couple of weeks ago at the IAF Europe conference in the Netherlands. Helen is a member of IAF England and Wales in Bristol. Michael, you're an IABC member in the Netherlands. Rianne, I think you're also a member of the England and Wales London meetup group. Michael Ashworth, I also saw you in the Netherlands a couple of weeks ago. Please do raise your hands. Let's hear from some of you. Don't be shy. Thank you, Michael. Please go ahead. Unmute if you're muted. Michael Nord, I mean.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome.
Good. Hi, Martin. Good to see you and good to see Michael Lambion. My name is Michael Nord. I'm a change and communications consultant based in The Hague, working with clients all over the world. I work for a global consulting company, and I also do a lot of facilitation as part of my work with my clients.
Thank you very much, Michael. Welcome. And Sue, thank you for raising your hand. Please go ahead. Sue Ingram.
My name's Sue Ingram. I am a trainer. I specialise in training managers in difficult conversations and firing styles.
Sue, I can barely hear you. I wonder if you could raise your volume a little, your microphone volume.
Do my best.
No, I'm not hearing you at all. Sonny and Michael, are you hearing Sue okay?
Is that better?
Mm-hmm.
Is that better now?
Oh, that's
Yeah.
much better, Sue. Thank you. Yes.
Oh, cool. Great. Okay. My name is Sue Ingram. I'm a trainer that specialises in training managers on difficult conversations and firing staff so they don't know they've been fired. The reason I'm here today is that so often I go into an organisation and actually what they want is change, but they don't quite know how to do it. And they're also asking for facilitation support in trying to define what that change looks like. So this is why I'm here today.
Thank you very much indeed, Sue. Who else would like to introduce yourselves and tell us something about your interest in facilitating change? Yes, please, Roseanne, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Yep, I can.
Good. Hello, my name is Roseanne Charlton. I only heard of the organization, the IAF, fairly recently, but was extremely interested to find out more, and so that's partly why I'm listening today. I've done a fair amount of facilitation, but in quite confined circumstances, meaning in one particular organization rather than broadly in a variety of organizations. And I very much enjoy it and would like to continue, but I have never done virtual facilitation. So I am interested in change, be it virtual or otherwise, and very much look forward to today's discussion.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Anybody else?
Welcome. Anybody?
Take another minute or two for introductions. David, yes, please go ahead. David Bull.
I see Kasia coming in from Paris as well. Yep.
Now I can. Thanks, David.
Yeah, good. Just getting used to the technology here. As I said in the little chat thing on the right-hand side, I was until recently Chief Executive of UNICEF UK, one of the UK's largest charities working in international development and children's rights. And I've been 32 years as a Chief Executive in the charitable sector, and now retired a few months ago. Interestingly, I was asked to submit a tender for a job that involved some facilitation recently, and I was searching around on the internet, which is how I came across this webinar. we didn't get the job in the end, but obviously it's a skill which is important, and a lot of my work as a chief executive has involved managing change, of course. So that's something hopefully I have learned a little bit about, but I'm keen to learn more about facilitation techniques as well.
Well, thank you, David, and welcome. Thank you all for joining, and welcome also to Tariq, who's just arrived. I've given you microphone rights as well, so please do connect your mic and feel free to raise your hand when you're ready to speak. So you'll see the agenda for today's session. We have a short presentation. That'll be Michael will share something of our experience of last week's Twitter chat during International Facilitation Week. Last year's Twitter chat during International Facilitation Week last year, and some of what came out of that. Then we'll go into Q&A and further discussion. We'll ask you to share something more of your experience about facilitating change. And then we'll go to reflection and close before the end of the hour. So I think let's move on. Michael, if you're ready, we'll move on to the presentation. And for that, I've removed the webcam, and you'll see static images of us, just to minimize the demand on the bandwidth today. So Michael, you should be able to manipulate the PowerPoint slides yourself, but please let me or Sonny know if you need any help. Over to you.
Sure. No, that's great. Thank you very much. Let me just make sure that I actually know how to do that. Just give me 1 second. I think, yep, got it. Great. So the first thing I want to talk about briefly is, as you mentioned, Martin, last year we got a large group of basically facilitators and other people interested in facilitation together for a tweet chat session where we basically shared good practice from across 3, if not 4, and possibly even 5 continents. And I just want to briefly talk about what came out of that first and foremost. I've tweeted out a link to a post. In fact, you, Martin, you wrote that up afterwards. So if you go to either myself or I'm sure Martin's Twitter feed, you'll find it very quickly. But in a short order is basically that in order for to align people behind change, you first of all must have a context that's conducive. You need to have a high-level vision and goals, and ideally values as well. There must be inclusive and authentic participation. You need humility, patience, and deep listening throughout the process. You also need to be open to what needs to emerge. And then last but not least, you must remember that leadership has to be clear, decisive, and at the same time inspiring. And what we're going to do today is build a little bit on that with a case study really based around a change process that's taking place in IBC. In fact, I've got at least one other IBC here. In fact, I think several, Kasia and Michael Nord and possibly others, who I hope will add their comments as we go through this. It is, if you've ever done a Pitcher Kucha or Ignite talk, you will be familiar with slides swapping very quickly. So it's really what I'm trying to do here is to make a set of high-level points very quickly and then get us through to basically the interactive discussion, because that's where the real exchange takes place. But if you feel that I'm going too fast, you can slow me down. Or if you feel that's something that's worth exploring in more depth or detail, then do feel free to reach out to me basically after the presentation. We'll talk on a one-to-one basis. So first of all, as I mentioned, the déjà vu all over again. Well, not quite. We're building on it, but here's a link to the Storyfy from last year. Basically, if you search for Fact Week Chat on Storyfy, it'll come up fairly quickly. You should also be able to find the post that I mentioned. Again, both of them have just been tweeted. But let's move on to this year and talk a little bit about how you can align people behind change. Here's a practical example. As you can see, Martin there on a piece of work that he and I did with the European Training Foundation. Basically getting 120 people onto one page, but you can also do it with 1,000 leaders or more, and that's really what we're going to talk about here, particularly a practical case study of work that's taken really 4, almost 5 years to basically get underway and achieve. So it's not a short-term process, but I'd like to just share a couple of examples of things that work particularly well as you go through that. First, once you found your leaders, then secondly, find out what it is that they're looking for. And it turns out that actually a lot of leaders are actually looking for a challenge if you put it in the right context. And that's back to that insight from last year's Twitter chat. And secondly, you would have heard from last year that it's about having a clear set of values and also a vision. And in the case of IBC, it's about a clear piece of work on mapping out basically how can the organization create change. You can look this one up in more detail later, but the key point here is to have a very clear articulation of what does the organization do and how can people contribute to it. And in fact, often when you end up in a change situation, you might end up with a traditional hierarchical diagram like this. I can promise you very few people will be motivated by it, and they might even be put off by it. So what you can also do is you can help people understand what their role is. From board level, for example, there's a set of really useful principles, and you don't have to make up your own. You might draw on, for example, the Code of Good Governance. And in fact, these 6 principles here should apply for actually any working group, I would argue. But another thing that you can do is really help people understand how they fit into the bigger picture. There's quite detailed Venn diagram here, but really the key point I want to point out to you is that in IABC as an organization, which is the International Association of Business Communicators, an organization basically spread across the world, and bringing together people who work in communications at the international level. There's basically different parts that people do, but the key thing is what binds them together. Clearly, first and foremost, basically that there's a clear framework, but there's also some freedom to operate within that framework. There's a clear understanding that it is a highly interdependent organization, and last but not least, that there's a significant scale to it. And then back to just like with the governance element, there's a set of methodologies and processes and so on that you can use. And what we would recommend is that you use well-established standards and methodologies, right? So in today's Twitch chat, we'll talk about technology participation. We'll probably talk most likely around ORID, which is basically a particular method for facilitating a good conversation. But I thought it would be appropriate to just quickly throw in to the conversation here an example from IABC, which is basically the global standard for professional communication, which is that you start with ethics, you make sure that you have that context, again, back to those learning points from last year, and then you basically execute with consistency, make sure you do your analysis, and then only then the strategy, and finally the engagement. Unlike some people who might be tempted to start with engagement upfront. And really within that, you've got to remember that as you are communicating, a bit of consistency really does help. And one of the ways you can do that is to keep a consistent tone of voice as you talk to people. And you might find that instinctively, for example, if you're a facilitator, that you do this automatically. But if you're working with a client, you might want to ask them if, for example, they have a tone of voice guide so that you can fit into basically a little bit of the cultural framework of the people that you're working with. Also, you probably want to, like we saw from the top tips from last year, you want to make it highly immersive and participative and collaborative and so on. So here are a couple of examples actually of facilitation in action at an IBC conference. So these pictures are courtesy of IBC Europe, Middle East and North Africa. So with thanks. So basically an example of cafe-style tables. You might make it highly interactive with people writing, doodle and drawing and so on. And ultimately, you also want to make sure that you capture feedback so that people can see that things are being played back and captured appropriately and so on. And that are just some of the illustrations here, which of course, if you are a experienced facilitator, might be second nature to you. But it may be useful to you, for example, if you're trying to work with a communicator and illustrate to them how you can add value to the work that they're doing. And ultimately, that leads into basically, if you have a set of leaders and you can provide that context and make it immersive and enjoyable, you can actually present it as an opportunity for them to make change rather than something that you're imposing upon them. And really, in closing, I want to just share a little bit of the leadership advice from a set of IBC leaders from around the world. We gathered it using paper airplanes, I kid you not, and we've unfolded them and tried to smooth them out a little bit so you can actually see what it says on them. So first of all, lead by example and inspiration. Secondly, find a way to open yourself to possibilities, inspire others. In fact, that matches the insight from last year's Fact Week chat. Also, social media is free and effective way to get the IBC brand out there. And indeed, I would say the brand and the conversation around IAF and a range of other, not just organizations, but also initiatives and methodologies and ways of thinking and of course, doing. And then be the objective observer of your own experience. And if you struggle with that, then that's probably the time that you need to hire a facilitator who can play basically that impartial part and help you through the journey. And then last but not least, basically reach out and connect to other people. So in quick summary, we talked through basically the key things from last year, the 6 top tips for aligning people behind change. The context must be conducive. High-level vision and goals is absolutely essentially. There must be an inclusive and authentic participation. Humility, patience, and deep listening is required. You need to be open to what needs emerge whilst remaining focused on the vision. And then last but not least, leadership must also be clear, decisive, and inspiring. And I hope you can get a sense from our very small and brief and fast case study here how some of those tips were basically carried out in practice, really through a process which, as I mentioned, has taken almost 5 years to unfold, is continuing. This year, the next round of strategy facilitation is underway, where the organization is beginning to look forward to its next 3-year strategy. And again, facilitative methodologies are being used for this and are absolutely crucial to the process of involving people and aligning them behind what's next for the organization. So without further ado, I'll tweet out a few more links, but I'll basically hand back to Martin so we can move on with the Q&A and the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael. It's great to hear from your perspective as a communicator and as a facilitator something about how both professional skills can be applied to this, to the process of change. Please do share any questions or comments on what you've heard from Michael just now in the chat pod on the right. Please do also raise your hand to speak. We'd love to hear some questions and comments verbally. Who would like to be first? Peter and Rianne, thank you for your comments in the chat pod. Would you like to expand on those by opening your microphone?
Well, I was wondering, subject to how the change is going to be perceived to be anticipated by those who will be affected by change, you could potentially open a whole can of worms with people venting, you know, to put it, things like dirty laundry outside as opposed to what you want to do. So I think social media is useful and you can't avoid people using it, but actively encouraging people, I think, would be very risky unless you're 100% sure that what's going to happen is good. And I'm saying that not as someone who's tried to enable change, but somebody who's been on the receiving end where things could have been done better, which is my reason to participate, is like, what are people taught on how to do good change facilitation, to see how what I can learn from that. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael.
I could maybe cover that.
Do you want to respond to that before I go to Michael Nord?
Yeah, I think that's a great point you're making, and I think what's important is that if you use basically in-person facilitative approaches, such as, for example, the technology of participation, you can basically set up a set of group dynamics which are more conducive to people being collaborative over time. You're always going to have some people who want to get some things off their chest, but both through Orit as a conversation method, but especially through some of the methodologies where you basically break people up and have them brainstorm individually and then form teams of maybe 2 and then smaller groups and so on. Basically a methodology known as the consensus method. It tends to be very good at basically allowing both basically things to come off the chest, so to speak, but also actually ultimately ending up with a very constructive exchange that actually has a practical outcome. It's something that I've been using for many years now. And in fact, I brought Martin into the RSA, which is a 260-year-old institution, which means that it has a certain amount of right there I call it baggage within it, as any organization of any age tends to have, and used it very successfully with different sets of people who had basically divergent objectives and divergent visions to ultimately bring them onto one shared page. And I think I could probably
Thank you,
find
Michael.
one of Martin's
Michael Nord.
Yeah,
Thank you, Michael Nord. What was your comment?
Sure. I see your point, Jan. I see your point in that when you allow these discussions on social media, you do allow yourself to be also the receiving end of negative comments. But on the other hand, if you were to do it in a town hall, you would also have people who would stand up, especially if they're the receiving end of change. So I think it's about be open and it's about facilitating the conversations and allowing people to vent, but do it in a way where there's a respect for other people as well. And I think, Michael Ambion, you have seen when you have been on the receiving end of some of those negative shitstorms on social media in IBC, but I think it also brings more positive than it brings negative at the end.
Yeah, if I may add to that, so there is inevitably, I would say, a small minority, and if you are leading change, you do need to have thick skin. That is, unfortunately or fortunately, a requirement for basically if you want to drive some change. That said, if you do have thick skin and you take an objective approach to it, and especially if you continually focus on being open and transparent, then actually don't underestimate the group's ability to moderate itself. What you might find useful, though, is if it is a very complex change process, then not just facilitation, but also reading up on some of the broader change theory. So, for example, consume some Kotter, if you're familiar with the management writer and thinker, who's one of the authorities around how to achieve change. And there's a number of titles I could recommend, which I'll put in the chat exchange in case people find it useful. Michael.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, thank you. Anybody else, please raise your hand. Thank you, Rian and Sue, for your points in the chat. Sue, I see you say reality of change is 4 to 5 year process, still ongoing. Are you talking about a particular change there?
When Michael said that he was working on a project that's been 4 to 5 years and it's still ongoing, and I was thinking, gosh, because I'm not working with large organisations. I tend to work with medium-sized organisations. I've got two issues. One, that they think that change can be done this year, and two, that the CEO wants change, but he or she does not want to change. You know, yeah, I want the change to be, I want the organisation to change, but they're often a sticking point, and it's this allowing them, supporting them to have that self-observant stance on themselves and on the organisation is quite an interesting one. So I'm already thinking that I would work a lot with the CEO before we even started on the public change exercise. So that CEO,
perhaps one of the ways the facilitation role and one of the things the facilitation and communications role has in common is that we both have a role in helping our clients see and understand themselves differently.
Yes.
And the impact they themselves are having on their organisation, on their system.
And I would work with the CEO and possibly the senior leader team to start practicing the change that they desire already. Because if you take it out to the wider world, then the first thing that the working mass does is look to the senior leadership and then judge them against what they are saying they want. You know, and then pointing the finger and saying, but you're not doing it. You're not doing it. Yeah,
Thank you.
Peter,
Peter Hurst, I wonder if you'd like to expand on the comments you typed in the chat pod. Discussing the change expedites it, as long as it's positive.
Mm.
Peter? I'll unmute you if you'd like to comment.
Yes. Well, to me, I mean, it's all a matter of getting it into the focus. Lots of things going on in everybody's mind, and change, you know, if you can, you want to ignore it. So discussing it's good in terms of bringing it into our awareness and, you know, accepting that it is or is going to happen in some sort of fashion.
Thank you. And Michael Ambion, Roseanne is typing in the chat, it would be interesting to hear some of the common challenges that you've encountered.
Sure. The first challenge is actually not necessarily people pushing against. The first challenge is that quite often people who communicate, so senior leaders who communicate, and even communicators who communicate, whether professionally or not, are surprised around the amount of times that something has to be repeated in a friendly, participative manner, if I can put it like that. It's not unusual that senior leaders will make an announcement and then kind of move on and expect that everybody else has caught up, and that quite often is not the case. So a lot of the work, first and foremost, is around laying down the breadcrumbs and really gently guiding people back to them so they can keep following along. Because actually, most people, in my experience, in organizations, large and small, want to be part of what's next. They do want to actually participate and also basically follow guidance and use good practice and so on. They don't necessarily want to work against the organization. And if you make it easy for the majority of people, even though your initial first mover group will most likely be a minority, but if you can help facilitate that group, then quite often they will actually take care of the centers essentially for you and basically help you move them on as well. So those who are a bit more skeptic and so on. But again, it is back to that old adage, which is basically communicate, communicate, communicate. And one of the greatest way of communicating something is not necessarily through broadcast, it's actually through conversation. So again, there's a methodology that I certainly like. I know Martin and I expect Sonny will like too, which is basically ORID. There's a really good book for that. It's called Focused Conversation. Easy to find on Amazon, but I can post a link to it. And then, of course, in bigger settings, using a set of methodologies. And if necessary, if you are too personally tied to the change, you might want to use a professional facilitator to make sure that the group perceives it as being an impartial exchange. Does that help?
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm looking at David's comment here. 2 points occur to me. We're talking about change as a generic concept, but there's huge diversity in scale and scope. Yes, absolutely. All change is not the same, is it? The other thing that occurs to me is that change will happen. Change is always happening, and change is happening on an increasingly rapid and complex scale. Part of the question here is not simply how can we bring about change, but how can we influence the kind of change that happens and the way change happens and the kind of impact that it has. Because sure enough, change will happen one way or another. Tariq, I'm intrigued by your comment. I'm the only one with interested in the impact technology can have on change success. Would you like to expand on that a little? Eric,
Hello
you're
everyone,
not
can you hear me?
muted, so please go ahead and speak.
Okay, hi. I'm intrigued by the framework advised by Michael, and I was wondering whether those high-level points that he has mentioned, if we look at them at the low level, whether they would contain any technology elements. For example, uh, coming from a technology background, we're using frameworks like enterprise architecture, business process management, to facilitate change and connect people around it. So do you have any elements of technology within your framework?
You know,
Michael?
yeah, that's a great question. I love that. So full disclosure, I'm an old IBMer. I spent 9 years there. I spent 3 and some years as the head of digital at Motorola, overseeing, in addition to a bunch of the external facing technologies such as the Motorola Media Center, which of course the earnings are reported and things like that, but also the 50,000 user platform for internal collaboration. And my short answer to you is that yes, technology can form part of change if you use something along the lines of service design, meaning you build into the technology a user journey where the change basically becomes obvious. So a practical real life example is probably the experience that the average PC user has versus a Mac user. I'm hopefully not making a divisive statement here, but the two approaches to the technology are quite different. With regards to complexity and so on. So that's one example. I would argue, though, that if you really want to align people behind change in a way that draws on people as knowledge workers or knowledge contributors or participants, then you probably at some point need to make it personal on a one-to-one basis. That said, there's lots of collaborative tools. I use Slack with colleagues. That works really well, but still it is just a tool, right? It's just a maybe accelerator or contributor to the process. Ultimately, change is a human-led element. So to kind of sum up the answer, technology, yes, it can definitely change things. You will notice that, as a practical other example, airlines have made you check in for their flights. They used to have a member of staff doing that. You probably didn't really have a choice in that. Basically, they just made the technology easy enough and kind of almost forced you into it. But that's very different from, for example, changing the organizational culture of an organization. That probably requires more hands-on, face-to-face type of work, even if actually what you want to change is how much people work face-to-face over time or how much they work virtually, say via a tool like Slack. Does that answer your question, Tariq?
Thank you very much, Michael and Tarek. We do want to put some questions to all of you, and I'm going to hand over to Sonny in a moment to put some questions to you to deepen this discussion. So before we do that, please do raise your hand if you'd like to raise any new comment for Michael or question for Michael, or any comments and questions on what you see in the chat pod at the moment on the right. Any final comments or questions now on this stage? Okay, thank you. In that case, let me move on to the next layout and invite Sonny. Thank you, Sonny.
All right. We've got 3 questions for you here, and because they're set up as little chats, you can continue as you were in the other on the other screen to type in your responses. But we're looking at what's worked well in your experience of aligning people behind change. What have been some of your experiences in terms of challenges? And then how might we better connect, learn, and collaborate together across our professions and our associations behind this whole issue that so many of our organizations face, the one of aligning in change. I'm just going to be quiet here for a minute and let you go ahead and get your thoughts out, and then we'll talk about them a bit. And there's some great comments coming out here. All right, it looks like we're close to done typing. Some more challenges are coming out right now. While those are finishing, let's start to talk about what has really worked well. As you look down through everyone's comments, looks like at least two or more of you talked about being clear on the vision and including participants in it. Where have you seen that working well, either Michael or Kaya?
Michael here, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I do a lot of IT change programs and projects for large clients worldwide. And I think the more I work with them, the more I see that people are mostly interested to understand the why. So why are we doing this? What is it we're trying to achieve by doing the change? what is the vision that the leaders or whoever came up with this have in mind or have in his brain for the future when we've gone through the change. And then you can do the how and the what and the when. But I think having the why, sharing the vision, sort of enables people to see, if I do this and if I change, that will happen, and then the company will be better off, or the department will be better off, or we'll have a better IT system, whatever. But I think that vision is very, very important to start with.
Okay, Kasha, did you have an additional comment on that? Or if not, the walking the talk has come up several times and getting people engaged in that. What have any of you done or seen done that supports people continuing to walk the talk, or even starting to after they've been talking about it for a while, to get them actually engaged in what they're saying? Go ahead, Rianne.
I think it's about seeing, not just hearing, that feedback is being taken on board. Because obviously not everyone, when change is proposed, is going to say, oh yes, this is what I've been dreaming about all my life. Thank you so much for proposing it. You know, people sometimes don't like change. But if then people say, it's a good idea, however, have you thought about the implication on X? And if they say yes, 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 but then don't see any action as to how it's implemented, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to, you know, completely reverse the change because of X, but just at least showing that they've taken it into account, saying X has been raised as an issue, this is how it's been tackled, as opposed to, because, you know, at some point otherwise words become hollow.
Mm-hmm. And Michael, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Sure. I want to share an example from one of my clients. The client wanted to set up a system that enabled to create LinkedIn profiles, as we know them from LinkedIn, in an internal system. And they wanted everyone in IT to fill in their profile, and we were being measured on how many profiles were filled in per department. But I realized that the leaders, so the CIO and his leadership team, had not filled in into their program. So before we started communicating, I went to the PAs of all the leaders and said, you need to sit down with the leaders and ensure that their profiles are filled in. Because the first thing anyone will do in the organization is to look up the leader and look at his profile. So before we launched, we ensured that the leaders did walk the walk or walk the talk before we send out any communication and ask people to sign up. So I think in leaders behind the change before we are rolling out the change.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you see there as you look through people's comments that you'd like to hear more on or hear discussed before we move over to the challenges? Well, hopefully, as we move into challenges, we'll pick up some more from each other on ways some of the challenges have been addressed. We've talked about engaging the leadership, and that's getting that to happen has been critical. Looking down through what people have said here. Oh, a challenge Michael mentions is other change projects in large organizations that are taking place simultaneously, so the employees are being sort of hit from a number of directions all at the same time. Any of you talk a little bit about where you sense that could be addressed, that particular challenge, could or you have seen it be addressed? Michael.
Sure, I think it comes back to what I also wrote in the last column. It's about having change networks. It's about speaking to other people who are involved with change in your organization on different levels, and to understand what other programs will take place when you're rolling out your change program. In the very large organization, it's difficult not to have simultaneous change programs, but they are, of course, of different nature and then of different urgency. So it's about aligning the messages and ensuring also that you piggyback on messages when you roll out your message for change. And I think you can do that by building up a network of other change people, change agents in the organization.
Okay. Let's see, I had another one. Oh, Tariq, could you speak a little bit to the what your just tell us a little more in terms of the underlying drivers and means. You talked about the complexity of those. I think it'd be really helpful to hear a little more about that.
Sonny, I just noticed Tariq had lost his microphone, so I re-enabled it.
Thank you. I was just scrolling down to see. Where was he? Go ahead, Tariq. Your mic is now back for you.
Although, Tariq, you may need to click the mic button again to reconnect.
Sorry, I had a crash for all the shockwave window on my side.
Ah.
Were you asking me anything?
No, we're glad you're back. Yes, I was asking you to say a little more about the complexity of underlying drivers and means.
Yeah, sometimes this is something I witnessed within my company back in the UAE. Sometimes the team that is responsible to execute the change does not really understand the drivers that made the management take into the change initiative in the first place. So the management might have told them something about their drivers, but sometimes people are not buying into those drivers, and they always believe there is another set of real drivers in the management eyes. So probably again an honest and transparent communication from the management to at least to the leadership team who is responsible for driving the change is really necessary, and the means as well. So people sometimes get concerned about how their personal interests are being harmed or benefited from the means executed by the management themselves. So being transparent, honest about the drivers, being also transparent as well on the means, and making sure that personal interests are either met or at least considered. I think that's crucial.
And I've been curious as to what some of you have seen as the underlying drivers or means that are not generally revealed. And it's sort of like the employees know there's something there, and they may even sense exactly what it is. But those of you who have experienced this, what have been some of the things that have needed to come to the surface in order to move change in a positive direction? Go ahead, Tariq.
Yeah, for example, that's a common thing in the UAE and as well as in the Gulf countries. The percentage of locals versus the percentage of expats is extremely low. And sometimes there is this local expat gap where all the management or majority of the management personnel are from the local community, while majority of the leadership and the underlying workers are from the expats. So and those communities don't mingle and don't mix to the point that they have common agendas and common interests. And at least for majority of GCC countries, that's a major theme of distrust between the management and the underlying leadership.
Good point. And it looks like our time is running low. So Martin, do you want to move into something else now, or should we take a little bit of the how we connect and learn?
Thank you, Sonny. No, let's take a minute or so on how we connect and learn.
All right. I've seen a number of things of having change networks in your organization, sharing best practices. There's a lot here of getting together and talking and sharing.
Right.
Those of you who've done this, if you could share with us some of the insights you got when you did it. What has come out for you by doing this kind of connecting and learning?
I might share myself, Sonny, that one of the inspirations for doing the Twitter chat last week with Michael was my having attended the IABC conference. I think that was before the Twitter chat. And I went along, the IABC Europe conference was held in London, and I went along to find out more about this profession, communications, and this association, and see what I and IAF might learn from them and vice versa. And I was enormously struck by the potential for learning and collaboration between us. A very strong theme of their communications conference was that we have to move from cascade to conversation. And I'm thinking, well, we know a thing or two about conversation. And at the same time, many of we facilitators are working in large organizations. We absolutely need communication skills to get people in the room for our facilitation or to communicate the results of our facilitation so that what we facilitate in a session in a room actually brings about the kind of change that we're looking for. So it struck me that the potential is great between these two professions, at least.
Yes, I would agree with you there. And I really appreciate Rian's comment about seeing change as a tool and not an end in itself. Could you expand on that just for a minute, and then we're going to move to the close, Rian?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I didn't have any specific incident or case in mind, but especially if things don't go so smoothly, it can be seen as, you know, if the reason for the change isn't communicated well, then some may start to perceive the change as keeping people jobs, so to say, and that might or might not be true. So it could be a balance of perception and actual case, because maybe outside consultants need to earn their keep, or senior management need to have something nice to leave behind for their next thing. So in that sense, you know, having clarity that change is necessary. You know, the world is moving on, everything's changing. But that it should still be kept in perspective as to why are we doing the change, that it's to improve organization X from being A to being B, as opposed to doing it for the sake of it.
Okay. Well, I will turn it back to Martin with simply the raising to consciousness, Kasha's comment that some training is needed, that we need to learn new ways of behaving ourselves.
Thank you, Sonny. Absolutely, there's always more to learn. We are out of time, but before I shut down the recording, let me thank you all very much indeed for joining and for sharing all this experience and insights. Please take a moment or two, if you can, before you leave, to share a rating of today's session and contact details you would like to share with each other. Feel free to wait until after the recording is stopped before doing that if you wish. Let me remind you that I shall circulate, I expect tomorrow I shall circulate a link to a recording of this session and also to transcript of the chat pods and the materials shared and so forth. In the bottom right of this screen, you will see also links to some other further resources, more free facilitation webinars. I'll be announcing soon the topic and date of the next of these webinars. Details of virtual facilitation training and of Sonny's virtual facilitation collaborative and Michael John's Align Your Org, and also follow the link to International Facilitation Week to find out what else you might get involved in this week, online and face-to-face. If any of you are in London by any chance, do join me tonight. We have our IF England and Wales social meetup over beer and food at King's Cross at 6 o'clock tonight, so I'm looking forward to seeing many colleagues there. Thank you all very much indeed. I shall close the recording and look forward to reconnecting with you online or face-to-face some other time. Thank you. Bye for now.
Thanks, Martin.